Okay, so good afternoon everyone. Thank you so much for being here for our panel this afternoon, talking about the growth of European football rights in Asia. I should just say before we start, if anybody's got any questions at any point during this panel, feel free to raise your hand. We're happy to take your question. We'll chat here for about half an hour, 35 minutes, and then I'm happy to throw it open to the floor if anyone's got any questions then as well. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to our panellists. First of all, to my left here, we've got Robert Klein, who is the CEO of Bundesliga International. The Bundesliga experienced significant growth in China in the current cycle in media rights value, certainly. So it's important to look at reasons behind that and other markets that could see potential growth as well. To the left of Robert, we have Chris Guinness, who is the Senior Vice President, Head of Asia Pacific at IMG Media. IMG, of course, sells Serie A's international rights, so we're doing plenty of deals across Asia Pacific in the coming months. And last but not least, we have Marcus Luer, who is the founder and CEO of the Total Sports Asia Group. TSA, of course, operates SportsFix, the streaming platform, which is currently operating in 3 Asian markets, and they also have Serie A rights as well. So I guess just to start off then, it's a broad question really, I'll come to all 3 panellists. What would you see as the main reasons for the growth of European football rights in Asia?
Well, I mean, I think obviously there's a sort of a legacy of interest in European football. You know, a lot of people who are passionate about football in Asia, you know, have aspirations, and you know, they've always followed European teams. And obviously, when European football took off in popularity in this region, you have to remember that local football leagues in this region were all pretty weak. Obviously, that's now changing with what's going on in China, in Japan, in Thailand, in Indonesia and other places. But irrespective of that, there is that sort of legacy interest and deep interest in European football. The other thing that one shouldn't underestimate is that there is very, very strong gambling interest in football, and the timing of European leagues and matches into Asia is very, very conducive to gambling, and I don't think one should underestimate the importance of that fact.
Robert, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think definitely on the legacy side, there's you know, the history of the leagues being there originally stronger. I think also as players from the region started to go over to the league, so if you talk about the Bundesliga specifically, that creates a local relevance, and that local relevance is what you want so that you can really you know, grow the league. So Japanese players in the Bundesliga are you know, there's 7 of them now, 6 of them are from the national team. We've also South Koreans, you know, and that helps. So when we then talk about later on about the Bundesliga and how it can grow, if you've already got the local relevance, you've actually got players there. That is a natural. For sure, now the local leagues are becoming stronger, and the AFC Champions League itself is. I think that's a good thing generally for football. You know, in the region, if it's good for football, then it's going to be good for us. So I think that's very positive.
And Marcus, how about yourself?
I think my colleagues have already covered everything, but I think to me the key would be the weakness in the Asian leagues historically. That's for sure. There was a big there was an open playing field for the Europeans or other Asia sporting rights coming into Asia. So it's the same assay is the same. It doesn't just apply to football. You know, if you look at tennis, what are the biggest tennis events in the world are not in Asia, right? They're Grand Slams around the world. So I think it's always been that lack of local competitiveness which has driven the value of international content in Asia. And I think both of them already mentioned it. That's changing dramatically, that actually people realize the #1 league in a country should be the local league. Right? You don't go to Germany and the Premier League is the #1 league. In Germany it's the Bundesliga.
That's right.
Still. Similar in Italy or wherever example you want to use. So I think that needs to be the case. It's crazy in my mind that, and having lived 24 years in this part of the world, that you spend more money on international football than on local football. And I know what, I mean, we can argue all day long why that is. Naturally, it is because of the lack of talent or you know, the same level of quality being played there. But that's what it is. It's just simple. You know, it's not so. You know, the European leagues are great, but you also have a weak product locally, and that's really what drove it initially.
Just on that topic, of the comparison with the local leagues, I wondered, if I was to put myself in the shoes of an Asian football fan. We've seen lots of teams from Europe come over for pre-season trips as well. So I just wondered, really, does that have much of an impact in terms of swaying support from the Asian fans when teams actually come to play here as well?
I think that is the reason why the Premier League is the #1 league in Asia, because they've done it, the teams, not the league so much, but the teams have been very aggressively coming into Asia for, what is it now, 20 years at least, probably if not more. And if you compare that with the German teams or even Italian teams, have done a minute portion of that. And on the back of it, I do believe the Premier League, besides that, is an exciting league, don't get me wrong. I am German, so maybe a bit biased to some of these comments here. But I do appreciate the power of the Premier League and the product, the way it's presented, packaged and everything which comes with it. But yes, that actual ability to connect with the fans and having the teams here made a huge difference. I think the Bundesliga over the years lost out there big time.
Yeah. The next question, maybe correct for yourself, Robert, particularly as it's the issue of kick-off times. And I've been speaking to a few people about this today, and they were saying about how the Premier League out in Asia has probably benefited from the kick-off time structure, particularly on Saturdays. And it may be an area where La Liga has struggled, but also it can work well for the Bundesliga, having so many matches that are Saturday afternoon, European time. But yeah, I just wondered, what impact do you think kick-off times has on the Bundesliga's popularity? And also, have you looked into possible kick-off slots in the future and how this can impact on future popularity?
Well, from a broadcaster perspective, or anyone who's buying the rights, the kick-off times are definitely key. People are still buying the live content, so the live sport, and we definitely look at it. There's already been a change this season in terms of offerings on the Sunday that we have, and also on the Monday evening. But we would, particularly for Asia, would have to come earlier, as you're saying, on the slot on the Saturday. So it's something that we look at. It's also something you can understand from a league perspective. It doesn't happen overnight, because you're talking about affecting clubs, you're talking about affecting fans, and in Germany both of those will take time. But it's something that definitely is a key factor in the rights buying.
And Chris, I'll come to you for this next one. Obviously, because you've got so much experience of selling the football rights, in this part of the world. When you have an issue of, perhaps what's happened with the Bundesliga in recent years and with Serie A, you've had an issue of one team constantly winning the title year after year in recent years, and I just wondered, how exactly does that impact on rights sales, if at all?
Look, I mean, I think within a specific league, you're always going to get certain teams that are preeminent in terms of their popularity in this part of the world. But I think most of the leagues that we're involved in, have a big enough brand as a league to be sold on a sort of communal basis. I mean, on a collective basis. I mean, clearly, if the Premier League were to go down the route of allowing the Manchester Uniteds of this world to sell their rights on a standalone basis, you might have some issues. So I don't see it as a sort of a major issue, and I certainly don't see it as being one that affects the value if you have consistently the same winner.
And I should bring you in on that as well, Robert.
Yeah, so I mean, I think anyone who follows the sports knows that for Bayern has been dominant over the last few years. I would agree exactly with what Chris is saying. The Bundesliga is more than that. When you're buying the rights, you're also buying a certain set of programming of hours, and therefore the product itself needs to be good. And consistently we've shown that is in terms of the live, what you're giving in terms of the shoulder programming, everything that you can do around that. If you can change the kickoff times, that's also plays into it. Generally speaking, anyway, in sports it's cyclical. At least we hope so. So there is some change. It is definitely better if you've got a title race right down until the last day. On the other hand, if you look at the Bundesliga this year, we have got 7 clubs as of today who could still qualify for the Champions League, and it's a very tight race. So over the last weekend, there was 3 changes of positions. It's our job as a league to make sure that we give the storytelling locally, so that then that's of interest. The game, for example, Dortmund against Frankfurt, which was on Sunday at 1:30, unfortunately here, but was an unbelievable game. If you are a broadcaster and you've got that quality, then I think you will still be interested.
And of course, what can't be forgotten is that it's going to be such an important year, of course, when it comes to selling European football rights. So by the start of next season, we'll have lots of Premier League deals being done. Champions League, Europa League deals obviously set to be announced, I believe, in the next few weeks as well. We've got La Liga, Liga as well. So, but then there's also another issue in that a few Asian markets, even for the Premier League, it was difficult to extract much more value when they did their last deals, for example, in Malaysia, India, and out here in Singapore. So I'll come to you first, Marcus. Do you think that there could be much of an issue in terms of extracting much more value even out of the top European leagues in certain Asian markets?
Sure. I actually wanted to jump on the last one for a minute. Just want to throw a different spin to this. I don't believe, and I fully agree with my colleagues, and I can easily argue that in the same way, but I just for fun want to argue the other way around. I don't believe actually that fans are fans of a league, they're fans of a club, or in some cases maybe a fan of a player. So I'm not a fan of the Premier League, I'm a fan of Man United, or I'm a fan of FC Cologne, as painful as that maybe sounds like right now, for the Bundesliga. So if what we do, and that's really sort of wearing my sports fix hat to some degree, we're going completely the other way around. We're creating a structure where the fan only pays for what he wants to watch, and if it means he's a Man United fan, and let's assume one day we have the Premier League right in a particular market, he has the opportunity to buy that particular product. That means he can buy that one Man U match, or he buys the whole season of Man U matches. Similar, I would only buy FC Cologne. I would literally not care about the rest of the Bundesliga, as harsh as that may sound here, right? So I think that is where I do think the world needs to change. It doesn't make sense, this whole collective approach. It makes sense for many other ways. As I said, I can argue there's what we just said all day long as well. But I do think there is the approach from a fan perspective is wrong. As I said, I just want to watch Premier League football. If I'm a football punter and I bet on it, and Chris is absolutely right, that is what drives a large chunk of the audiences here, and it drives a large chunk of the revenue here. That's maybe again different, but if you're a real fan, you're a fan in a different way. And I think there's a rethink of the leagues and how you sell it. Simple example I always love to use is Man United claims has 600 million fans around the world. Their revenue right now is what, 650 million euros or somewhere in that ballpark, what I remember reading. So that means, for every fan they get $1 right now, the entire year. You don't believe that if you're truly a Man United fan, and I go to you and say, you pay 10 cents or 50 cents per match to watch it on your phone or watch it whichever way you want, how many of those 600 million could potentially sign up? Those numbers could get large very fast. They can make in 2 weekends what they make the entire year right now. But that needs a completely different structure and completely rethinking. Anyway, we'll leave that out there for a minute. Coming back to your other question about where do I see rights go? I've put my TSA hat on now for 20 years of doing what Chris does, selling TV rights around this world. It is always a very simple format. It's always about competition in a marketplace which exists, or competition we artificially create, right? And Chris and I that's what we do for a living. we create a lot of times there is no competition. So I don't believe it has something to do with how great the league is. It honestly has mostly something to do with what is the current composition in the marketplace. If you have new players coming in, when China went crazy, why was that? It wasn't because all of a sudden the market realized the value was so much bigger. No, because you have people with large funding behind it, whether it was artificial or real is a different story. When you have, Thailand was what they call CTE there for a period of time, and then 3 years later they went bust, right? Because they couldn't figure out the business model. I can give you hundreds of examples where that existed, where either new technology with the IPTV players in the world popping up, or others. Now, none of that is truly sustainable, and in most cases it is someone is bankrolling it for the sake of other things, right? So therefore, again, when you come from the world we're coming from, we're saying the fan at the end of the day should be the one dictating and controlling to some degree the true value of it. So if I have 1 million people on my platform telling me what is the value for these games or for that particular content, that is how you dictate what is the price of the market. And that go up, it could go down. The rest is just arbitrage and us playing around with it and see who's smarter, who can play the market better.
So So when you say there about how in certain markets like what happened in China, you can have one buyer come along as we had with the sports who
it's artificial.
Yeah, who obviously start bidding very highly for these properties. Does that mean then, in a way, I could put this to all three of you, does that mean it can almost be in out of a league's hands in a way, in the sense that could you almost just stumble across a market where you've just got one buyer that's coming in bidding aggressively, and then that just obviously helps all the leagues involved?
Yeah, that would be my view.
I think it's not. I think what Marcus says is definitely, in terms of the market tension and the market creation of tension, is correct. If you're a seller, there's either a market tension which you can benefit from, which is great, because then you've got 2-3 players, ideally 4, and then you'll be able to increase the price, or there isn't, and then you need to do a great job of selling, right, and artificially doing that. But I think on the other hand, in terms of still today, we talked about whether we're at the tipping point, but still today, you've still got a pay TV environment, you've got programming, you've got areas where people want good quality product, and are still prepared to put a price down for it. So I don't think it's all artificially inflated, and I'm not sure, to get to the point where you're going to be able to have either video on demand offering where you take exactly what you want, then you need to have a business model today that is going to be able to sustain and create that value so the rights holders sell. If we were in that situation, it would have been done. I think it's the way it's going to go, right? So if we start talking about now the consumption of media and what's happening, so if you take the Gen Z, these guys don't watch TV anymore. So and they're not watching TV. So at some stage in the future, they're going to consume live sport differently, or they might not even consume the live sport as it was originally perceived by us. It will be after, or it'll be a 15-minute summary, and it can be very much digitally on demand. So then you get to the fragmentation of the market. How are you going to segment your rights? All of these things that people are thinking about now, and then also watching over their shoulders saying, when are the big tech giants going to come? Are they actually going to start spending? I mean, they have, obviously. Everyone's seen the MLS and the NBL deals in the US. So they're definitely doing more than dipping their toes in, because previously they were saying to us, not to us, because I wasn't doing that, but if you go and talk to them, it was, we'll give you reach, but we won't give you money. Right? Now Facebook has gone and hired the chief exec of Eurosport just to buy rights. So obviously something's happening, but I guess the question we all ask ourselves is when? Because if you knew it was coming and there was a definite business model, it'd be much easier to change. The point is we're in a point of transition right now, and we have to really look carefully as to where we go.
Yeah, I mean, I think Robert's right. I mean, as far as pay TV is concerned, the sort of the area of opportunity isn't over. But the harsh realities are that in most markets, certainly in Southeast Asia, you've got either a slowdown of growth, a flattening out, or a decline, and that has been sort of effectively taken over by seeing a shift to OTT type services, i.e. menu-based services. But when you look at China, for example, and I know China is a kind of a unique example, and you look at a company called like PPTV, and you look at what they're spending on predominantly football rights, and they only launched their pay-per-view SVOD platform late last year. And even if you take sort of fairly bullish assumptions on what they're generating in terms of subscribers, that has no sort of bearing in terms of being anywhere close to a break-even point based on the huge investment they're making in rights. I mean, staggering investment. And so I think, and Marcus obviously has a unique perspective on this, I think whilst you have a situation while companies aren't basing their investments on an ROI consideration, there are other companies in China that are doing that, Tencent for example, then you are going to have a situation where at some point, if the cost of rights continues to go up, but the subscription level is at a much lower rate, unless I'm being really stupid, that just increases the break-even point. And so, you wonder, during this shifting climate and the growth of OTT, which is yet, is unproven. If you're really bullish about China, you say to yourself, look at the entertainment numbers for OTT. If football, different demographic, different audience, if that can match that growth over time, and you can prove that there is a market for paying for content in China, especially amongst the young, and that's really crucial, then obviously you can be very bullish about the future. But for the moment, you've got a situation where you've got an established market that's flattening out and declining, and you've got a new menu-based market for sport, I stress, not entertainment, which is doing well, where the numbers don't stack up. So I think as long as there's new competition, and Marcus is right, it is at the end of the day about creating competitive tension. Then if I'm the Premier League and I'm about to go to market as they are, then you might be feeling quite bullish. But Marcus is also right. When you've only got 3 years to exploit the rights and in a new platform, and it becomes partly an emotional play because you know that the Premier League is your standout premium product in the market. Over 3 years, you're going to really struggle to make that work. And so maybe if the Premier League doesn't see a decline in values, and it remains to be seen, maybe they'll realise that perhaps they're going to have to look at things like extending licence periods, etc. So I think we're in a very, very interesting and evolving time, and as yet that shift is not fully established.
So obviously the Premier League has its issues, and then I wonder really just what exactly the other leagues can do to catch up with Premier League. I don't know how much the other leagues look over their shoulders at the other leagues when it comes to strategies across different markets. But I guess I'll start with you, Robert. Particularly because it's to start with the rights holders' point of view. I mean, first of all, do you look at the examples of what the Premier League has done in Asia when focusing on your own strategy across Asia?
Definitely. I mean, you'd be silly, foolish not to. They've been here the longest. They had the first mover advantage from a product perspective. They have an association with the region, historically, and then they're particularly the clubs, as I think Chris or Marcus was saying, have done some really good work here. So you have to, in terms of building their brand, and by definition, the EPL brand. So we look at that. We also look at La Liga. We look at what Serie A are doing. It's sort of a benchmarking, which is important for us. And then we have to decide what we do. And so we are very committed in terms of coming local, particularly in Southeast Asia. As you probably know, we've had an office here since 2012. And in terms of China, we'll be opening one by the end of this year. Because of the contract that we obviously have with PPTV and also CCTV on the one hand, but also because we feel we have an important role, and also a setup with the league which is a bit different with our association with clubs. So we also want to be, with the Singapore office did a lot in terms of bringing the clubs here. Dortmund is now here, but whenever they came, whether to set up an office or whether to create an event or whether to have access to an influencer, a lot of that work was done here, as well as of course the work through to China. And this is a road that we'll continue to go on, to be local and to be closer to the partners, so that we think the opportunities that there are existing in Asia are ones that need to be defined much more exactly. We need to work with a much greater degree of business intelligence in terms of understanding for ourselves, first of all, the football fan, what then is the Bundesliga fan, is there any crossover with the local leagues or other leagues? And then also, where do you service them? What is it that they want? And with everything that we've just talked about, what kind of content would they like to see? What time would they like to have that at? Are we talking local languages? Because the level of localization that we've done until now is very little. We need to be able to go to Vietnam and talk to the fan about Bundesliga in Vietnamese. It would seem self-evident, but it takes time. It takes understanding and knowledge. So, in short, we do our own thing, but we absolutely look at what the others are doing.
So, I guess one for the panel again. What are the chances that eventually, well, obviously, quite a few rights are going to be sold soon. Bundesliga won't be for a while across Asia. But what are the chances that we could see the leagues coming closer together in terms of their value, and the chances of other leagues catching up with the Premier League?
Well, everyone knows what the values are. So my ambition and my answer to that was, I think that we will definitely be able to close the gap on the league. On the EPL in particular. But to do that, you can't just arrive and say, I've got an idea, can you please pay me some more? You need to, as we said, define, and for us, that is about local relevance. It's about really being able to answer the question to whether it's the Vietnamese broadcast or the pan-regional broadcast, so what are we bringing to you, which is different and which will fit to you, whatever your value drivers are, right? If you're a pay TV, it's probably because you want to get more subscription, therefore, through your carriage deals. How do we do that? Then it's a different proposition than if we actually go market by market. So in the future, we'll have to look. We have the advantage that we have some time to look at it. We have some time to develop the strategy that we want. Not a whole bunch, because within 12, 15 months that comes quite quickly. And without a doubt, we'll be looking at interest at what IMG are doing with Serie A and how La Liga perform, because it will inform our timing and what we want to do down the line. But it doesn't change what we're trying to execute, which is basically a very local strategy, which requires time, investment, it requires the clubs to come with us, it requires a bit of luck to get not 1, 2, 3, 4 new superstars after the World Cup would do very nicely. And if we could win the World Cup and remain the League of the World Cup champions, that's also good. So all of these things will fall into the melting pot.
Like the sun.
Yeah, and so we'll see where we end up.
And Chris, obviously talking there about Serie A with IMG. I guess just wanted as a kind of a broad point really, how significant is Asia going to be as part of IMG's plans to sell Serie A rights for the upcoming cycle?
It's hugely important and a very significant part of our outlook for Serie A. I think Serie A compared with Bundesliga has perhaps not been so progressive in terms of marketing its brand, and we're doing a lot of things to address that. I mean, for example, I think one of the strengths of the Bundesliga that Robert's referred to is the number of Asian players playing in the Bundesliga. That is hugely important. Having local talent excelling on an international stage, and it's not just about football, as you all well know. It's pretty much in every sport. As soon as you get an Asian player excelling on an international stage, look at women's golf. As far as Korea is concerned, you've got 10 of the world's top 20 who are Korean. You have a massive difference. Serie A doesn't have enough Asian players, I would argue. It has a lot of Chinese ownership, but that's not enough, and so it needs to do that. We're looking at a whole range of different initiatives. One immediate initiative, pretty much without exception, there are going to be only 2 weeks where there'll be midweek kickoff times. So we're trying to encourage Serie A to basically maximise the kickoff times to make it Serie A suitable for this part of the world in terms of maximising viewership and interest. And we're trying to promote things about Serie A that are really strong. I mean, one of the factors for this year is that in most of the other European leagues, you've got one runaway leader. Man City in the UK. Obviously, we've got Paris Saint-Germain in France. We've got Barcelona leading by 8 points in La Liga, etc., etc. Well, the 2 top teams in Serie A have only got a point between them, and I think that generates interest. The number of goals per match of Serie A is the highest of any league in Europe. I don't think most people were aware of that. So, we're trying to promote the positive of Serie A. There's no doubt that to a certain extent Serie A had fallen behind some of the other leagues, but I think that was down to not promoting the brand sufficiently, not promoting the values of Serie A, and I think that's what we're trying to do. And we're also doing a lot of things digitally to build the product in terms of OTT platforms, etc.
Well, Marcus, obviously Sportsfix bought the Serie A rights for this season only, I believe. So I guess really, how has it performed for you so far? What have been your thoughts on how Serie A has been received by your audience in Malaysia?
Sure. Again, I'll do what I did earlier. I jump on the last question, and then I'll go here. I think from my point of view, when it comes to the leagues and the competitiveness against the Premier League, it's all about who can become number 2 in the region. And I think that was clearer maybe a few years ago, where actually at one point it was probably Serie A who was the second best or considered. And for a while, La Liga maybe was the big Spanish clubs there, and I would argue now it depends a bit on which territory you go to, and the Bundesliga has done, I think, extremely well, especially with the Fox deal. But if you look at the Fox deal, why would Bundesliga was able to do a deal with Fox? It's because they lost the Premier League, right? So I think to some degree that's actually the mechanism you'll see, is that the Premier League will always take first the big slice of the action. And then it's really, I think, for the other 3 leagues to figure out how do I position myself right below them. I think the argument of that you can accept or drive that same value as the Premier League is probably unlikely. They're just a bit too far ahead in a sense. But how do I beat the other 2? I think that's if you look at what La Liga is doing, right? They put a big office now here in Singapore. again, why are they doing it? Because they realizing they have to be on the ground, they have to be actively promoting it and doing more than just whatever, hoping that Barcelona and Real Madrid has amazing players and everyone loves them, right? So I think, again, to me, it's the race is about who will be a clear number 2, and on the back of it, you'll see those rights fees, elevated accordingly. Right? Coming back to what we do in the world of SportsFix. SportsFix is we do a couple of things. One is we've actually bought Southeast Asian content. We have the Thai Football League and the Indonesian Football League. We bought some Asian football. We have the Chinese and the Korean league, and then the Italian was now our sort of flagship. When I compare how the leagues do across, the Asian leagues do as well as the Italian league. So that's again for me not a big surprise. It may be a surprise for other people. You look at Premier League ratings in most markets. The local football league rates them in terms of ratings. If I take Malaysia, Malaysian football matches on a traditional platform versus on a Premier League on a traditional platform, most of the time the local matches are always higher rated. So that's where the whole oxymoron is here. That why are you paying these? Malaysia pays what is it? 100. Last cycle was what, 150 million US or for 3 years, so let's say 50 million, 60 million US dollars a year. And the local league went for, what's the last cycle now? About maybe 20 million US, right? But you get better ratings, it comes with a different level. Right? One is you have that massive prestige of what considered the best league in the world with the best players and everything and the most prestigious clubs. On the other hand, you actually have a product which, funny enough, sells better. Right? And so I think there's something, sometimes people just think of it in a different way. Similar we see with us as well. Asia, as much as a lot of the European leagues have done a good job bringing the time zones forward and make it better for us here, so we don't have to watch this thing at midnight or 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, like Serie A still has a few matches. Again, the Premier League is the front rider of that whole thing, and that has made it even better and more interesting. If you have a match at 6, 7 o'clock in the afternoon, or 9 o'clock, but the Asian matches are automatically in prime time. Right? I don't have to fiddle around with it. It's just when they naturally come in here. So I think it's a mindset, it's a change. If I would walk around my office, people would still mostly talk about the Premier League or big international football, the World Cups, and so on. But if you go in the broader market, in the rural part of the country, the local leagues do it very well. And that is where the masses are, right? And I think that's sort of where the pay TV operators may be not operating there. They can't sell in those places because that is the folks who can't afford it. But that's where there is, OTT and other platforms will deliver it in a very different way. And so I see that I think there will be more, I hope at least, or I believe to see that in the future, the playing field will be balanced out between what people pay for local versus what they pay for international. I think the international will get a run for their money for local leagues also.
And obviously, most Asian markets now are seen as ripe for football rights. It seemed to me there's only really been a couple where other sports have really been a long way in front of football, perhaps in parts of Southeast Asia. But I just thought I should put it to you guys. What would you maybe see as untapped markets in Asia, particularly when it comes to selling rights across the next few years? That's fair for anyone to take.
I think you guys have got more experience in terms of the Southeast Asia. I mean, what I would say, I can answer from the Bundesliga perspective, and so I'll do that, and then you can go to I think the more interesting, wider question. For us, it's the markets which have got, it's got to be typical. It's got a high affinity with football, but which with relatively sort of untapped potential from our perspective. So we look at Vietnam, we look at Thailand, we look at Malaysia. I think India is a big question mark for everyone. I mean, there's so much potential there, but where do you start? And with football, there's down in Kerala, there's up in the northeast, and then you've got to haggle with cricket. So it's one hell of a challenge in that direction. But that's on the one hand, and the other one then is also not just untapped potential, but mixing in with what we spoke about before, which is the arrival of now the OTT platforms, the new entrants that are coming in. I mean, just in discussions here, you can hear some interesting potential movements in the market. So business models are changing, but there are new arrivals who are coming, and whether they will come with the right money or the fake money, they will certainly create the market tension.
And just one market also that mentioned there was India, and particularly wonder, with that market, whether now really is the time for another sport to compete with cricket. I mean, obviously the recent deal for the IPL rights might suggest otherwise, but I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that, Chris, in terms of whether now's the time for football to compete with cricket in India.
Well, maybe in the context of India, we should have a reality check. The first thing to say is that the total audience for sport is about 8% of the population, and of that 8%, 85 to 90% of the interest is cricket. So put that in perspective. The second thing to say as far as football is concerned, and Robert hinted at this, football is a regional sport in India, it's not a national sport. It's very, very strong in certain parts of the country. Third thing to say is that the local Indian league, and again, Marcus made a broadly a very good point, but to give you an example, the ISL in India, its ratings this year are down 57%. So, I think football in India, may sort of still have an opportunity long term, but it's not yet a sport of national interest. It's regional, and I think it's struggling. And I think broadly in terms of the market in India, you've got still a market that's totally dominated by pay TV. Free to air is pretty minimal in terms of sport. And that market in itself is consolidating. Obviously Star remaining very dominant, and you've had Sony obviously buying 10 networks, so you've had consolidation there, and the new entrant D-Sport is somewhat sort of struggling. So there may well be long-term opportunity in the digital space, and we may see a lot of growth in OTT, but for the moment that market remains a big question mark. Yes, in terms of its size, its potential, potentially huge, but the dynamics of the market are at the moment very, very skewed towards cricket. And if there's a kind of a crystal ball sort of question mark, it is that during the IPL, the T20 tender recently, Facebook made a bid of $600 million for the digital rights alone, and lost out to Star, that won all the rights. That is a serious statement of intent. So I think the one question mark I have about our business is the likes of the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Rakutens in Japan. These companies that have very different business models are kind of expressing an interest to get into this space. How will they make an entrance, and what will the impact of that entrance be? And certainly in that context, India is of great interest to those companies, or certainly to Facebook and Amazon.
So we've been talking a lot about club football rights on this panel, and another point I really wanted to touch on was the issue of Champions League / Europa League. Obviously, taking this week, for example, I've got a dilemma as to whether I want to get up at 4 AM and watch my team get knocked out of the Champions League this week to Barcelona. Really, can there be much that can be done about the Champions League and Europa League rights with the issue of kick-off times, with so many matches coming in the middle of the night during the week? I guess I'll start with you, Marcus.
Well, I struggle with this. I do believe there are moments when it makes sense to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and that maybe is the final, or that maybe it could be the World Cup, depending on where it is and which time zone it comes in. To get up for a, let's call it, regular Champions League match at that hour is painful. I've done it a few times, but it hurts your entire rest of the day. And I'm sure I'm no different than anyone else out here. So to me, I think Champions League as well as Europa League, and if you go to now the new Nations League, if you look at their kickoff times, they just don't work for Asia in so many levels. Because football is still driven by live viewing, it is still to some degree driven by the punting around it. I really struggle how the rights for that content can really maintain that level they're at. If you therefore comparatively could buy, a league which actually does deliver content to you now at, let's say, waking hours. So I think they have a hard job there, and unless they finally get their head around how to convince the clubs, the fans, and everyone else to get away from that 8:45 or whatever it is, 9 o'clock at night kickoff times European time, I can't see how that value will ever continue to grow. as great as the content is. I'm a big fan of what Champions League and all those platforms are all about, but it's just, it doesn't make sense. Who gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning to watch football? Ask anyone in Europe whether they ever would consider watching football at 3 o'clock in the morning. They'll think you're nuts. Here, you're expecting that all of us do that all the time. That doesn't work.
And did you two both agree?
I support a club that's not in Europe, so that's fine.
And yourself, Robert?
I think it's tough to get up at 3.
Okay, we've established But is that not proof then that it's not necessarily all about the big club names or you know, the big player names as well, in the sense that, because when you think about it, the Champions League are essentially saying, well, we can take the best from each European league. We've got everybody that you need, really, in a football club competition. We've got all the best players in the world. We've got all the biggest clubs in the world. So is that proof then that even with all of that, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be the best at selling the rights?
That would be my view, exactly that. I mean, we've had several discussions recently with the gentlemen and ladies who sell these rights, and honestly, now being not having not my agency hat on, but having the hat on of a buyer, there's very little interest. I can't make it work until, and that is the point where, if there's a way we can figure out how the audience actually likes to watch things at their times, so if I wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning and therefore I'm happy now to watch a catch-up play or, something which fits in my time, in my zone for 20 minutes over breakfast, and for that there is a real true value to it, then it becomes a different story. But for now, where it's all driven towards the live version, and unfortunately a lot of that clip content that disappears on YouTube or appears on YouTube for free, so there's no way you can create a pay model around it. I think any of these rights which come at that time in time zone, whether it's US Open tennis landing at the middle of the night here in Asia and all this stuff, you're going to struggle. It's just what it is. There's always an automatic cap to it, how the value can create.
Okay, so I'll just check at this point then. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to put towards our panel? No? Okay. So I guess then just to sum up, really moving forward, where exactly would the three of you see the overall position of European? Oh, sorry, we've got a question.
Hi, sorry. So I'm from the States, and obviously our rights deals tend to go, 10, 12, even like 15 years, but usually 7 to 5. So what is the typical length of the rights? And given the uncertainty ahead, is there any value to saying, let's do 10-year deals and 12-year deals because of the uncertainty with the Facebooks and what have you?
Yeah, typically the soccer deals are 3-year deals, particularly on the Champions League, but there are other leagues that do, different terms. And I think, to the point that we'll be discussing, without a doubt, it's something that has to be looked at depending on the region and the value that you want to get out of it. If you give someone a 3-year deal in terms of what Marcus was saying, in terms of and Chris as well, in terms of refinancing it, finding the business model, sometimes you're going to need more time, and therefore also as a rights holder, you'll be able to sell it for higher. I think there will be a move to longer terms.
Just follow up on the Facebook with the rights with IPL. It seems to me that when Facebook does get the rights for a major sports property, they're going to have an immediate problems in matching the audience numbers that were delivered. Look at what happened with BT, with the Champions League in the UK, and that Facebook's may end up turning around and do sub-license deals with a broadcaster to get distribution. So what's your sense on if a Facebook or a Twitter gets big-time rights, their ability to deliver a quality experience and even hit audience numbers that people are used to?
I think that is, in at least at the initial stage, that will probably be a model where they look at sub-licensing. If only also that if they manage to hit the big deals and the concurrent views, they've got a big technical infrastructure issue to deal with. And I think that's one of the reasons that they maybe haven't come in so quickly. I think they'd have the money to do it, but if you talk to the guys who are sitting behind, they're saying it's just not possible that you're going to buy a premium product rate and then you're going to have buffering issues within the first time you go live. That cannot happen. So I think it'll be as much as an exposure as a probably delivery standpoint at the beginning. I think you could easily see that happen. But if they come with the big bucks, then the rights holders won't mind.
It's a telecom issue right now more than anything else. The telco platforms cannot handle that type of volume. It's not on the Facebook side. It's actually the connectivity between the physical bandwidths. The minute we're in 5G land, it's done. the story's over. You will be able to watch on your mobile phone the same way you would expect your cable, your TV to watch at home, to work at home. So 5G isn't far off in many countries. Maybe a few years from now, but it's purely bandwidth, nothing else. The minute you crack that, it's game over.
One other quick question for you, Robert. You mentioned at the beginning that the increase in Asian players in the Bundesliga has been a big driver of growing interest in the Bundesliga across the region. Has that purely been organic, or has there been anything that the Bundesliga has done to help encourage that, and is there anything like that you're looking at to evolve your product to be more interesting to the region?
Yeah, there has been historically from the DFL and the Bundesliga, one of the approaches that we look at is to have an exchange with leagues or with federations. Often they're quite closely linked with a broadcaster, so the conversations can happen that way. I've been with the Bundesliga for 1 year, but obviously as a sports fan generally, but Son, who now plays with Tottenham, he came originally to Hamburg in about 2010. I'm looking at Dominic, my colleague here, because he knows better. But and that came off the back of a initial conversation and a cooperation between the German league and the South Korean league. So that was one that I would say worked spectacularly well. I think it's very difficult to duplicate something like that with a player at that level. But when we're going into new markets, if we take, for example, in Southeast Asia, in China, there's also a cooperation which goes beyond the license. In terms of an exchange with the federation and also at the CSL level, and without that, it's helpful anyway because it widens the conversation beyond the rights. So when you want to get more value, you can do it that way. And secondly, you have got the potential, and you create the storyline arc anyway. Even if we don't get a superstar, we can create the exchange between the countries, and it creates content and it creates, I'd say, a local relevance. So it's definitely something that we bring to the table, and at times can be very useful.
Okay, we touched on it earlier. I would add one thing, and the performance of the national team plays a role. I remember when Italy was winning World Cups and was doing well, it had an impact on the league. And I've seen, I would say, the same with the Bundesliga over the last few years, obviously, where the German team has done extremely well. It just puts the view of, especially a fan who is not a fan because he grew up in that country or because he comes from that city. We got to remember, that's the fans here. They don't really have that sort of, I live there and therefore that's why I'm my team and my city. For them, it's really about the quality and of course the perception of it. And then walking around as the world champion, which is what the Bundesliga / Germany does right now, and wherever it will be next time, is very important. So I think Spain saw that, the kicker, when Spain obviously had that big series of World Cups and European Championships. So I do see that again as a critical point where you will see we're talking millions of dollars difference for whoever will become the next world champion. If it is out of Europe, obviously a different part of the world is a different story.
There's been a change up in Australia with the English Premiership moving to Optus. How is that impacting on the way you guys are seeing rights? Because I mean, as a football fan and a big lover of football across the world, obviously not necessarily getting that content through on a daily basis, other than highlights through your traditional models of pay TV. Does that change the way you guys approach rights as you go into the market and potentially say, pay TV providers could be kicked out of the market totally?
Well, I mean, obviously, the sort of the dominance of pay TV when it comes to sports rights in this part of the world, with a few exceptions in certain certain North Asian markets. It's about competition, as we've discussed, but ultimately, it's the importance of the rights fee value, which certainly as far as football is concerned, Robert may disagree, but seems to override in most cases the desire for exposure and promoting the game to a wider audience. It's first and foremost about getting the top dollar. So that has sort of driven the sort of the dominance of pay TV in the premium sports space, particularly football. As I said earlier, I think we're at this kind of crossroad, this fork in the road, where with pay TV struggling somewhat and not being as dominant as it once was. You know, there are clear examples of companies simply saying we don't have the budgets anymore to pay the kind of rights fees that we've been paying. Time will tell whether that transference from a linear sort of basic pay TV model to a menu-based OTT model will actually create not only greater demand, a new audience in the cases of companies like Amazon and whatever, but until that happens, we have potentially a hiatus. There's no reason to completely panic, you know, the values are still there, but I think individual platforms or broadcasters that have been historically aggressive in this space, particularly in pay TV, have to be asking themselves, you know, especially if I only have the rights for 3 years, can I get my ROI based on the numbers that I'm currently paying and the expectation that those numbers will go up? And I think it's, you know, it's a very, very interesting time as far as that's concerned. And there's a large amount of unknown in terms of, you know, how it'll all pan out. And in football specifically, not helped by the fact, and Robert's in a pretty good position because he's not yet coming to market, but a lot of premium football rights are coming to market at the same time. So the competition is fierce, but the market is rationalising.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, thank you all for your time. Thank you.